Amy Jo, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so grateful to be here with you, Christy. Thanks for having me.
I've got to tell you, we are all so looking forward to you being at our event this fall in November. And so many people here at our office are fans of yours. I certainly am. And even just the last few months of following you, I've done a little research and your story is kind of incredible. So for anyone listening that isn't familiar with what you do, tell us a little bit about your business and kind of the backstory of how you got started.
Sure. So I really got started in what I'm doing now, if you kind of consider it that, about 10 years ago. I worked in the NBA for the Phoenix Suns, and it was really the beginning of the wild, wild west days of social media and brands trying to figure out how to use this new space. And I started experimenting and had some pretty kind of crazy things come my way and started my own company.
So your first client, official client, was Shaq. Like, let's just talk about this. How? Like, who in the world starts with that? So tell us a little bit about that story.
I know, he was a big client, literally.
Yeah.
7 foot plus tall. So yeah, Shaquille was playing for the Phoenix Suns at the time in the NBA, and I worked in the front office. And I had been lobbying for management to create a new role. And we called it the Director of New Media and Research. So it was new at the time. And so I'm using social communication to try and bridge the fans with the brands, our big sponsors, and the team. And I get a call one day. I'm sitting at my desk, and the phone rings, and it's from basketball operations, which was not usual for them to be calling me. I pick it up, and sure enough, they said, "Get down to the locker room right now, please. Shaquille O'Neal wants to learn how to tweet." And I'm thinking, okay. And they said, "You're the only one in this building that knows what that means." This was 2007, 2008. So it wasn't every day that someone from front office in marketing, works with the players or actually deals with the players. So I thought maybe I should talk to my boss. And then I thought, no, I'm going straight down there. So I took the elevator down and met Shaquille O'Neal. He handed me his Shackberry, which he called it at the time. Because everything has a Shaq term, right? This was before he got an iPhone, his BlackBerry. And I taught him how to navigate the space. And then we started really gelling, and I gave him some ideas. And it was something that took off. And before you know it, what we're doing throughout the day, which I'm kind of trying to hide because it's not my day job per se, it was hitting ESPN at night. And it just kind of took off. So when it was time for me to start to forge my own path and become an entrepreneur and kick that door open, he said, "I'll be your first client."
That is awesome. I love that so much. And it must have really helped you, Amy Jo, in this transition of going, okay, I'm learning this new media, right? That is kind of still on the front lines. People don't know what's going on. Is it going to be a thing? So not only are you going out on your own to start your own business as an entrepreneur, but you're going into a new space that isn't proven and isn't really, I don't know, steady, dependable, predictable, consistent, all those things that, you would kind of want. So there's so many variables at play. I would have to think that going out on your own, at least having a little bit of that experience with those wins under your belt of, your tweets and your stuff was hitting ESPN, and Shaq is going to be your first client. Like, what was that like in terms of giving you the courage to even do it, to go out on your own and say, I'm going to take this brave step into this new territory?
I had never imagined, having a relationship and being able to work with a brand like Shaquille, but also I never really actually had this big dream to be an entrepreneur. It just started to become more and more realistic and obvious that that's what I wanted to do. So this all kind of happened at one time. And the economic model and figuring that out was, in the beginning, it just was kind of consulting. And I ended up building an agency and having, people in 10 different countries that were working for me eventually. But in the beginning, there really wasn't a blueprint for this. So it was all new. And I think that's what made it exciting and intriguing for people to watch from the outside looking in. And my own following started growing. So eventually having more than 1 million people following me was a whole new, experience in itself. And it was, I was cutting my teeth as a first-time entrepreneur in my 20s. And it was my first rodeo, just figuring things out.
I love it. Isn't that what we're all doing, right? Like we're all just figuring it out as we go. I love how you said you didn't set out to be an entrepreneur, because Amy Jo, so many of the women I work with in Business Boutique, regardless of the industry or stage of business, I can't tell you how many people say, I never had a dream to be an entrepreneur. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. I kind of became a quote unquote accidental entrepreneur. It was just either responding to an opportunity or solving a problem in the marketplace or keeping your eyes open for something moving in the culture. And they step into that, with courage like you did. And then they're like, hey, wait a minute, I can do this thing. They just learned by doing. And so it wasn't that they had this grand plan. Even what I'm doing, not that I ever had a plan to do this, I kind of responded in the same way. Now, one of the things that I love about your story, Amy Jo, and I think you and I are cut from the same cloth, is you just take some bold moves. Like you, especially in the early days, you were trying out new things. You were doing some bold things early on. So talk to me about how you had the nerve to do that. Like, because I think nerve is so important in business. Like, you got to have the nerve. Like, you got to have the nerve to ask for things and go for things and try things that other people won't. And so talk to me about how you had the nerve to try some of those things that no one had done before. Like, I remember one of your stories was you got Shaq to do like a meetup. It was like, hey, I'm at this location. Will anyone show up? So how'd you have the nerve to do that, especially when you were just starting out and you were so new at this?
I think it was a combination of things. One, I moved around a lot when I was younger. So I'm kind of addicted to change and feeling a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And getting comfortable with that. So there's a little bit of that in my DNA. And then eventually I realized there's a renegade mentality. People just, you start to learn and you graduate of what seems scary or risky. But also, I was noticing, to your point, Christy, I was really listening and seeing the response. So, we had a Wednesday morning executive meeting with all of the general manager, the team president, all the SVPs. And I was realizing that there was actually an opportunity to create marketing partnerships out of this space. So I knew there was some revenue potential, and that perked their ears up. And even though I was usually the youngest person in the room and oftentimes the only female, I knew that I had something knowledge-wise that they wanted. So it gave me confidence to at least speak with a voice of authority about a space that was so new, but I probably had, 100 plus more hours than they had, or even knew the terminology.
Right.
And so, Shaquille is an interesting human in that he is kind of up for anything. He is a renegade, and he was willing to do this stunt, which I termed random acts of Shaqness. I said, what if we create these real world meets the virtual world in-person meetings with fans using social media? So we're bridging the virtual world and the physical world. And what if you stand on the street corner of 24th and Camelback in Phoenix, it's a big intersection, and say on Twitter and on your other social platforms, the first person to tag me gets tickets to the game tomorrow night. And he was up for it. And no security, didn't tell anyone. I was getting my hand slapped a lot these days. And sure enough, people started meeting him. And within minutes, they were there in person. The media shows up. And then eventually, we did this in Boston too. He moved teams a couple of times in the twilight of his career. And the authorities showed up because so many people came in person to meet him. And then we'd take video and photos and repurpose that so everyone across the globe could see what was happening. And all of a sudden, it started to transcend basketball. It wasn't just about sports and Shaquille. It was about the real person behind that personality. And it was like magic in a bottle.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that example because what was the time frame for that? Like, when did you do that the first time? How many years ago?
2008.
Okay, so this is
10 years.
an eternity ago in the social media world, right? And even what people are doing today that you did back then before it was cool, before anyone knew if it would work. And I just want to highlight a couple parts of that story, Amy Jo, that I think our listeners can really learn from. Number one, you didn't ask permission. You know, you asked forgiveness. You didn't wait for someone to say, oh, this is okay. And I love how you said you're getting your hand slapped, because my friends joke with me all the time. They say, you just assume that you can. Like fill in the blank, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You just assume that you can't. And then you get in trouble more because there's sometimes that you can't. I was like, yeah, but I get so much more done because I assume that I can. If you always assume there's some rule, or you've got to wait for someone to put a stamp of approval or someone to give you permission, then you'll miss out on so many awesome opportunities because you're waiting for permission. You're waiting for that stamp of approval. And man, just ask forgiveness, not permission, and get in there and try some stuff. And I love that you did that, because now that has obviously, you know, been one of the many bold moves that you did early on that has proven to be successful. And like you said, connected the virtual world and the physical world before anybody was doing that, which is just, it's just amazing to see how much that pays off. I love that you do that. And I think for our listeners, as a takeaway, assume that you can. When the rules aren't written, when you're not sure and it's kind of unknown territory, just assume that you can. Assume that you can get away with it. Assume that it will work. Assume that it will be great. And then if it's not, you can deal with that later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for the entrepreneurs or people that might feel like they have an authority figure, bring your results with you.
Yeah.
Always have your results in your back pocket.
Yeah.
And when you ask that forgiveness, it's usually a little easier when you have something to share,
some pushback,
ROI with it.
Yeah, totally. I love how you said something else too about being in some of these boardrooms, and you're with people that are older than you, in many cases more experienced than you, had a longer career than you. You might be the only woman in that room. And, you know, Amy Jo, one of the questions I get a lot, not only from women, but, you know, especially women in Business Boutique, but even women on the Dave Ramsey show. When I'm on Dave's show, a woman might call in and say, you know, I want to do XYZ and I have this much experience and knowledge, but I'm a woman. Or, but I'm a woman in a man's industry and I'm so young. And my advice to them usually is, you know, this is not a woman's issue. Certainly there are going to be instances where you're in an environment where you're outnumbered, but just be so good they can't ignore you. And I love how walking into those rooms in your case, you weren't focused on, well, maybe I'm outnumbered. Well, maybe I'm the youngest. Well, maybe no one will take me seriously. You're like, I have something they want. I have knowledge. And you stood on that and you had confidence in that. And I think there's a great lesson there as well for our listeners, that even if you're in an environment where you feel out of your league or intimidated, you have something to offer, and focus on that, not on what you might be lacking, but just be so good they can't ignore you and share what you bring to the table, and people will not, they won't be worried about whether you're a woman, man, you know, 13 or 35 or 55, it doesn't matter. So I love that you did that.
Absolutely. And it's so true. I think being a female is not a handicap. You know?
Yes.
You definitely just have to do the best job, and it's that you possibly can. And if we kind of remove gender from that equation, it's a distraction that kind of just drifts away. And quick funny story I have to share with you, Christy. So for about 5 years, I wore red fingernail polish, and I still love it, but I mean, I wouldn't be without it. And the reason why was because I would be in these meetings with the top sports agents in the world, with clients that are movie stars or billionaires. And here I am, young female, and I wore this red on my fingers because if at any point I looked down to take notes or just be like typing, it would be a reminder to just pick your head back up and remember that confidence and how you got there. And it's just a funny little anecdote, but it seems to resonate. You know, what are the little things you can do in those scenarios just to remind yourself, to put yourself back on spot? And yeah, I should have been sponsored by some fingernail polish line.
I love it.
It's just a trigger to pick your head up.
I love it. So many of the, you know, whether it's a body posture or hand gesture or facial expression, so often it's unconscious. You know, if we look down or make ourselves small or shrug our shoulders or not sit at the table, stand in the back of the room. But any little tricks and tips that you can do for yourself, and whether it's fingernail polish or something, you know, a quote on your notebook, something to remind yourself to be fully present and be there. I love that. That's a good tip. It kind of reminds me of something I work with a lot of women on, they have questions about confidence. Like, well, what if I don't feel confident? I'm like, well, if you don't feel confident, it's okay. You've never done it before. Like, that's normal to not feel super confident in an environment you've never been in, doing something you've never done. Of course you haven't, because you've never done it. It's new. But you just fake it until you feel it. Even if you hold your head high, throw those shoulders back, sister, let's act like you belong. And then over time, you will feel like you belong. And by the way, in the process, you teach people, hey, I belong. And so it's a good self-fulfilling prophecy. I love your fingernail polish as a reminder in that process.
Oh, and I love fake it till you become it, fake it till you feel it. Exactly. And that's something that I try to really push home with some of the female entrepreneurs that I'm investing in too, is you just, it is an act. Sometimes you have to act that way until you feel it.
That's right. Act the way you want to feel and the feelings will follow. That's so good. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you want to sign up for my brand new course, Social Media Simplified, you can go to businessboutique.com.